on WQHS Radio. So, hi everyone, and welcome back. So, if you are a returning viewer, we are always grateful to have you with this. And if this is the first time that you're actually watching the show, where have you been all our lives? And we're excited to have you with this as well. So, if you are new to the show, Changing Reality is essentially a series that features some in their own reality. And with me, your host Harsha, will be hanging out and interviewing phenomenal people from social change makers, entrepreneurs, business owners, industry leaders, to even artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across. Listening to our story, collecting little nuggets of wisdom from them, it will enable us ourselves as the audience to actually hopefully shorten our own learning curves through the things that we want to do. And I wanted to do this show simply because I felt like there are so many people out there way passionate about how they actually managed to do that in their own capacity. What were the struggles that they had to face? What was the changes that they had to make in their life to get them to that phase in creating an impact in the wider community around them? And to read experiences, the stories, and I would say the truthful conversations that we can actually have with individuals who have done it before. So just to show you how much I believe in the power of stories that doesn't just drive this show, but drive every person, the way that I've operated, things that I've done. And it actually helped me found and even today run my own education movement called Ascendance that started off in Malaysia, which is where I'm from, but today collaborates not just with our Malaysian Ministry of Education, but partners in 28 countries to help provide an alternative education platform for any student who wants to change their reality. So we essentially work with students from elementary all the way up to college through various sessions, programs, experiential learning activities, and projects that help them discover their passion, learn about the world around, and take all of that content, take all of those stories, those experiences, and use it to create meaningful impact in the lives of those around them as well. And we've been really fortunate over the last few years to work with over 35,000 students, 970 communities, and if this ran by students as young as 8 to 25 years old. And the reason we've been able to create all of that has been stories. It's been kind individuals who have taken time out of their busy schedules to share what worked for them, what didn't work for them. And just like that, I hope that this show is that same platform for all of you listening. Now, joining us for today's episode, we have an amazing EdTech entrepreneur and executive level business coach who, over the last 15 years, has founded and grown two successful education 85 schools across 6 states. These businesses have achieved triple-digit growth, received noteworthy press, and featured innovative, I would say, best-in-class technologies. Most recently, our speaker has ventured into the world of publishing, hosted several webinar series, and has provided a lot of information and content back to EdTech entrepreneurs all across the globe through his own shows as well. And for many of you who may know him, you may have seen his show called Breaking the Grade, in the education space as they make their way to the top. And it's been a show that I frequently have tuned into, that I've enjoyed listening into. And he also has another amazing show as well, which is actually called How I Broke This. And it's a podcast for people who've actually broken things growth that occurred from the ability to break things up in a sense, and another amazing show that you should check out. But without further ado, let's welcome our amazing speaker to our virtual stage to give you the 411 himself and to share his brilliant experiences with this all. So, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you bringing me on, but honestly, I was really enjoying listening to your story. So I think at some point we've got to have you on breaking the grade or how I broke that or whatever. I just know you some story that you have too.
Thank you. You're very kind. And I think one thing that I love asking people in the ed tech space or the education space, and you have done so much for the education community. So I'm going to throw you with the easiest question to get us started. How were you like when you were student? Like, did they like to be part of the education, or did you just think that it's done and dusted once we graduate? Because I know that most of us were. How were you as a student?
Well, I think my wife and kid would probably tell you I'm still lost and confused. But as a student, um, no, I really wasn't lost and confused. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, which was not be a student. I did not like school. I wasn't bad in school. I wasn't good in school in the sense of my grades. I was always a good kid, I think. No, I got in some trouble, but I was relatively a good kid. Um, and the thing was, I just didn't really want to work hard. Like I would much rather talk to people, have fun, hang out, make them laugh, or do things after school. And so I think what I was able to do, what still benefits me today, is just kind of navigate um, the classroom. And I got better grades just by listening, engaging, communicating. It wasn't necessarily, the grades on the paper. It was hopefully the person. And so, yeah, I was not a good student. I didn't care. I had have two older sisters who one went to Amherst, one went to Harvard. Brilliant. But it just wasn't my thing. Sorry, mom.
You say that, but then today, you're not only in the education space, but even prior to that, you achieved so many absolutely amazing things, which I'll get into in a minute. But just follow up on that. What did you feel? And I ask this a lot because I think that it like what we feel in school kind of creates this little thread that connects back eventually at some point. But
Yeah.
what do you feel was wrong with the way education was put together when you were a student? I mean, that's always the best part, like time to reflect on education, because you're literally in the eye of the tornado when you're a student. So, what did
Right.
you feel was wrong with it, and did you want to make changes, or just get me away from this part of my life as soon as possible?
I don't know if it was what was going wrong because it was going right for so many people, including my sisters. But what was right for me was after school, was tutoring, was one to one. In my junior year in high school, I was lucky enough to go from a public school that was a phenomenal public school to a private school, classes of 30 to classes of 13. And that really worked well for me. So I think what was working well for a lot of people is working well for them, but for me, small classes, one to one, real like opportunity to get motivated by people like Mr. Moore, who taught math. And I still am awful at math. Um, and some other people, Mr. Penske, who we read books like Shoeless Joe, and 1984. And Mr. Penske is now a D1 soccer coach. And so it was those people that inspired me. And so I really needed to be inspired to to want to learn. But when I learned, I can still quote parts of Shoeless Joe in 1984 um, and those were the types of teachers that I really needed. Although I had one, Mr. Clark, who to this day, probably scares the shit out of 98% of the kids that he had, but we all learned so much from him. But the real type of teacher and motivator that helped me was always sitting across from me, encouraging me, or in a small classroom, really kind of pulling back the onion of what we were learning and not just here, learn this.
No, very, very well said. And I think we'll get back to that later in a second. But moving on with your journey as an individual, you, even before you got into the education space, had an amazing career in the world of broadcasting. I think you studied broadcasting journalism. You eventually went on to be a sports anchor. You essentially did, I think, almost everything that you can in the industry, from behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. This is something that most kids, we dream of doing, but we have no idea how to make it a reality. What drew you to that industry, when you were at that very pivotal point of figuring out what you wanted to do? At that point, it feels like for the rest of your life as a student. And why this industry, and how did you start making your entrance into it?
Yeah, I mean, your talk about storytelling is probably really what it was. I love talking to people, asking questions. When being in the sports industry, I was never a stats guy. I'm that's guy on fantasy leagues. In fact, the only fantasy league I ever did, my cousin Brett to basically run the league stats wise, and I just got to. Am I allowed to say this again? Talk shit to everybody, and like I just wanted to be a part of it. Um, so more about storytelling. I grew up right around the time that ESPN was becoming so popular. I was also fortunate to grow up in Washington D.C., where we had some world class writers at the Washington Post sports section. Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon and Tom Boswell. Um, journalism much there, although it gave the opportunity to meet the most wonderful people in the world, have the greatest 4 years that anybody could ever have. After college, I moved to Prague. And I remember being in Prague, and I applied to go to Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism. And I got in. My mom, I called her on the phone, like a payphone, because this was like probably 2001. And I was like, "You got in." She said, "You got in." And I'm like, "Great. I'm about to go get a beer, another one. Um, so can I just defer?" She's like, "No, you're coming home. You're going to Northwestern. You got one of the best journalism schools in the world. We'll see you soon." I'm like, okay. So I started in January, and after graduating from college, and that was the hardest year academically in my life. Um, it's the hardest newsroom I've ever been. And I can remember my professor Angadi, Joseph Angadi. One time it was a fake show. Okay, we were doing a fake show, and I was the sports guy. I come on at the end, and Joseph Professor Angadi, who's the producer of the fake show, is like counting me down in my ear. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And at one, like I got to be out at like 2, but we're doing crosstalk, and I probably talked for another 15 seconds. And basically, Professor Angadi picked me up by my ear and took me in the back in the production, and just basically, killed me. And so that I remember that experience. There's not too many experiences I can remember after I graduated and TV, my first TV gig in Virginia. It was tough. Certainly isn't as glamorous as it looks. And had to stop in Philadelphia and got to work for we'll just call them the Washington football team. And we created the Washington broadcast network for the Redskins. And that was a really amazing team to be a part of. There was a lot of really tough stuff going on there. I knew about a lot of it. A lot of it I didn't know as well. And I knew that in my gut I didn't want to be there. And so I also knew that this was going to kind of be the end of my TV career. And that's when I started my tutoring company. And I thought, okay, well, I see here the good, but more bad of how you run a team. I'm going to do the opposite. And that's what I took into running my tutoring company starting in October of 2007.
Absolutely brilliant, and it's extremely well experience in your entrepreneurship journey. You mentioned this, and I just wanted to follow up on that. You said it's never as easy as it is. It kind of looks like that when we're watching TV, take it for granted in a sense, right? I've done this and all that. But it's always like 100 times harder behind the scenes. And you literally were the one in front of the camera. I think you're essentially hosting the show for over 100,000 people. So for you, in a sense, what do you think viewers or people watching television or anything right now in this world realize about your role in the camera or the scenes, making the content, making the shows that we watch?
Well, I think that what the question really relates very similarly to being an entrepreneur. Nobody has any idea what you go through or I go through on a daily basis. I'm on my third business, and you can literally go from the penthouse to the outhouse in 5 minutes, from one call to another. I used to remember, with my enrichment company, be talking to a superintendent, and it's a school district of 200 schools. And we're going to do a deal with them. And we're so pumped. And this is a big deal for the company. Then the next call would be, a PTA president who was upset, provide kids had to sit there, and she heard from office staff and the principal pissed off, and we're going to kick you out next year, because it was always 1-year contracts. So, I think that what people don't notice, whether it's TV or being an entrepreneur or whatever it is, if you're laying asphalt or painting, is that there's so much that goes into it that you've got to endure. But at the end of the day, if you can't go with the bumps and bruises and the brilliance and experience the highs and the lows, then you're not going to make it to the next day. So to answer your question, I can remember, first of all, luckily you can't see this, but I'm not the tallest person in the world. So back then, okay, we had cameras that were huge. I mean, I don't know what to describe it as, but they were huge cameras that had 45-pound bricks, batteries on them. You couldn't shoot with this, right? And so I'd be walking around with this thing, and 5 days a week, you kind of produce your show in the morning, then you go out and shoot sports all afternoon. And I can remember just carrying this thing, getting into the bag, and then getting into the car. Okay. And then go where you got to go. And that's also a challenge, because I could get lost in the paper bag, and I would have to get from one part of Virginia to West Virginia and back to Virginia in time to write, edit, produce, clean myself up, tie a tie, and get on the air. And so there's that whole thing that's all behind the scenes, right? And then in front of the scenes, I can remember one game at a high school called Turner Ashby, which was basically like, I was covering high school sports. So like TA was like the Yankees of this area of Virginia. So their stands were always filled. And I can remember, like being on the sidelines at a football game, and, you got to follow the ball. You really got to follow the ball. And I'm realizing this ball is coming right at me, and boom, hits the camera, and I'm going backward, and you're trying to preserve the camera so it's not falling, so I'm sure, obviously I got back up. I'm sure it made the news. You laugh at it, put it on the news, laugh at yourself, and go along. And that's something you probably have to do behind the scenes. It's just, you're going to make mistakes, and just be okay with them. Be okay with the ball coming at you, knocking you over in front of a lot of people. Get back up. It's how you handle it.
Oh gosh, that is a brilliant metaphor. Like really a terrifying experience. And the footage must have looked really amazing, especially before the time of like cell phone cameras and all that. So I'm sure it was a great shot. Kudos to you. But terrifying. I don't know if you ever returned to another game again, like just after that.
You had to. You have to. It's just like you with your show or with your businesses and what you tell the people that you mentor is you had it, you done, go. We got to get back up. You have to. Show must go on.
Very well said. And as you said, it is a very similar, in a sense, mindset that's needed for entrepreneurship. You go from the best. And literally something just happened to me yesterday when I was almost at the verge of like complete meltdown, and then I got good news, and then I got bad news again, and this was all in the span of 3 hours, and I was like, I'm a much more emotionally volatile person than I assumed. So it is a very, I would say, as you to paraphrase in a sense, it is not something for the light of heart in a sense, or the faint of heart. So for you, in a sense, going into, making that pivot in your career, and probably not knowing this 100% or not feeling it, world of what you wanted to do, already has this in career, need you to be in that mindset 24/7.
One word, desperation, which, desperation kind of always takes you to where you need to go. I'm not going to go too far into it, but I had a really bad experience in between the Redskins and starting my tutoring company, and nothing else to do because I was fired, and so it made sense to do some tutoring and give back. And I got an opportunity to work with this kid, and he had two older sisters, and he didn't like to read, so we have a good fit. Older sisters, we just read everything, and he started going up in terms of reading and his enjoyment, so that was cool. And I got to another kid, same reading, good. Then got to this other kid, and he was like in middle school, and I was helping him with math, and we got to Venn diagrams, and I was like, out. I cannot do Venn diagrams. Just does not compute for me. And I hired a tutor, Michelle Silva, who was really with me on the tutoring team for the whole time that I owned it, like 10, 11 years. So, like on why I started the tutoring, it was out of desperation. When I think back on why I kept doing it, probably is because I'm not going to give up, probably when I should have at times, but I wasn't going to. I think back to why there was some success there early on. It was because of the tools that I had inside me and what I had learned. I guess I learned more than I thought I did at places like AU or American University or Northwestern. And I got on a local NBC affiliate in Washington, D.C., with a good story about summer brain drain. And the company took off from there. So, why did I start it? Desperation. How did I keep going? Probably, I was passionate. But there was some success and some early wins there that gave me enough momentum, even in the face of some really um, uh, tough challenges building the business.
No, very, very, very real. I'd say we like to think that it's always the vision and the bigger thing that drives us, but sometimes it's the wins, it's the success, it's seeing the next step that leads eventually. Like the way that you put that, every entrepreneur, and there's these two aspects of, or at least in my brain, aspects that you've got to reach on, you've got to make sure are growing at the same time, which is kind of internally what you're, especially in education, with your stakeholders, like managing your team, managing your clients, which in this case are students. And there's also the external part, which is getting the publicity, making new partnerships, getting more clients, getting more individuals involved. And even in that very short summary, you touched on both of those 2 points, and how you actually managed to grow it. And I just wanted to elaborate on each of those a little bit more. How was it like, being on kind of the flip side now? You were in the newsroom, you knew how stories worked and all that, and now you've got to, number one, look at all right, I've got to get the word of what we're doing out there. And at the same time, you've got to be able to, get more students in. You've got to be able to, get more potential schools, get more tutors, and find the right team. So how did you go about positioning what you had and what you were working on in a way that would not only attract the public, but actually provide people continue growing the work that you're doing? Because you were amazingly successful, number one, to get featured on those sites. But I also think you had, like, I think a team of 65 tutors by the end of it. And all of them were, like, I think you mentioned somewhere these university degrees from the top 100 universities. So you were attracting some real good talent there. So how did you manage to put yourself out there in a position where people wanted to work with you, people wanted to talk about the work you were doing?
I think it boils down to one thing, and just it's honesty. One of my mentors said, uh, everything that I wrote or said or did had the benefit of being true, and I stick to that today, for better, for worse, being honest. So, I was always trying to tell stories, never, never lying to a parent or a kid or somebody in a newsroom, but also trying to make it easy for them, you know, um, especially when it comes to telling your own story to somebody who's in a newsroom. I mean, they're getting pitched all the time. They're getting pitched in really crappy ways. So if you pitch it well and truthfully and just lay it out for them, you have a much better shot at getting yourself, and your company and your team featured. And I certainly still believe in the power of news. And I also really believe in the power of local news, especially when you're building a local company. And that's what that tutoring company was a local, tutoring company in the DC area. Um, so yeah, it was kind of interesting being on the other side. But I think the ability to write and tell good stories also, resulted in two things that I really believe in today and coach and advise companies on, which is community building and thought leadership. The community building was, reaching out to people and telling other people's stories so that they got interested and they got closer, even though they didn't know it. Like, I'm kind of doing this with my hands, but imagine this is Fairfax County, Virginia, and this is Montgomery County, Maryland, and they're kind of on opposite sides of the river. And I was trying to bring these two places together when it came to our tutoring community, whether it was the families or whether it was the tutors. And then thought leadership, I did not come into these businesses with a master's in education or a master's in business. So I had to present myself honestly in different ways. And so that meant back in 2009, 10, 11, 12, all the incredibly long movies that I can only imagine now. They would just be so boring to read on Constant Contact, but they were good for SEO, and they were, helpful to our audience. And that's like was very clear to me back then, and is still not clear to a lot of people now. Like, don't write for yourself. Don't write about yourself. Give to your audience. Whether that's in a newsletter or whether that's in a sequence of emails that you're going to send to a principal who's gotten 10 other emails that day about the same product, an SEL product or a math product. Talk to them about their pains and how you can take them towards pleasure. So, all of that behind the scenes or in front of the camera work really helped me, when I started the businesses. And, thankfully it's still helping me today, although I'm pretty sure I'm still paying on a monthly basis for that degree from Northwestern, but money well spent.
Okay. Well, we'll at least, at the very least, know that we'll be a little bit less, I would say, upset when we pay our university fees over the
True.
next couple of semesters. Okay, at the minimum takeaway. But you said so many points that I want to focus on that honestly it's terrible. Now I've got to pick which questions I want to ask you. Horrible. You should try being less interesting.
Sorry.
But one thing that I wanted to focus on specifically was you said this thing that was quite fascinating, which was on the topic of, honestly putting yourself out there and giving content that people that that would be able to engage with them in a way that addresses their problems, their needs. And as you said, it's something that everyone knows in theory. This is what we should be doing, and many people attempt it. And even I am no like, and I would say I attempted quite badly at times. So how do you actually know, number one, that what you're saying is reaching out to the audience that needs it? And number two, how do you kind of make sure that you are, or at least have the confidence to make sure that you are the right person to answer this? And this is something that I face like a lot myself. I've worked in education in a sense for the last 7 years, but at the same
Mhm.
time I'm still a student, so I'm not sure at times with my own imposter syndrome if
Yeah.
I am the most qualified to say this. Because on one hand I'm like, yeah, I could see why I would know a little bit, but on the other side I'm always just like, I'm sure there's so many people who know much more than that. So
Yeah.
how do you position yourself in a way that you're hitting the right people, you're getting the word out there, but you yourself feel authentic doing it?
Well, probably to work backwards, be honest with yourself. Um, Trust your gut. A buddy of mine who also started a couple businesses, we always used to say, trust your gut, nitwit. And that's true. So that helps. And then, from a technical standpoint, uh, pretty easy. Reply rates and open rates. When it comes to email, which I still believe is one of the best tools to get out there, and I'm pretty proud that we have reply rates for ourselves, for our clients around the 70 percentile, 72%, and reply rates around 7 to 8%, because we're reaching the audience that we want to. We're giving them information that they need, and we are talking to them about their pain in a very concise way, and we're already giving them something that they might want. And generally, that could be a strategy session, which really has to be beneficial to the person that you're speaking to, or I'm fortunate to be able to have people on our show, whether it's breaking the grade or how I broke that. So I can give them something already before I ask for anything. And I think people know at this point that, like, you're there to, everybody kind of wants something, but if you're willing to give before you get, then you have a much better chance of getting in the end. And you said, I think you said, I'll paraphrase it, like, you think that everybody knows this, but I'm not terribly sure that a lot of everybody knows it, and like, I bet if you took, especially in the education space, like 10 people who work at education companies, and you said, write your best email, I think like 8 out of 10 of them you wouldn't want to use, and I'm always happy, and this is honest here, if anybody wants to send me their copy, and I'm no amazing writer, but it's always helpful to have somebody else, to kind of look at your writing. But it comes down to being consistent, and being a pest either. I see people who have like email campaigns, where they'll email people 10 times, or they'll LinkedIn somebody like 10 times. Saw something on the internet that said, no response is a response. If they're not responding after 3 emails, you're done. And that's okay. Move along. It's not going to be a good fit anyway. So why try and force it? So, but that I do mean that seriously. If anyone wants to email me with their copy, I love seeing copy, and kind of going back and forth, like volleying with people on it. So feel free to send them my way.
Don't be surprised, like if you do get a lot of takers on that. I'm gonna send every email that I send out now, just be like, I need some thoughts on this. And so
Happy to
yeah,
help.
the warning out there. But moving into a little more back into the story of you and your first of two, and probably soon third, amazing successes. You also did something that was really interesting for a company in this space. You actually sold and exited and transitioned their operations out from the organization. And one thing that I often hear, quite annoyingly to my self perception, is that education companies, unless you're an EdTech company, it's really hard to scale, and it's really hard to exit, and it's really hard to, find people who want to take that over. So I guess the $1 million question is, how did you even go about thinking about that? And how did you actually make that switch and decide to do that and execute it?
I think businesses are like kids. And I'm on my third business, so kind of my third kid. And I'm looking forward to enjoying this one. So, yes, there were exits. But I also think that I spent so much time consumed with growing them and then trying to exit them that I missed out on not only some of the fun, but they could have been a lot bigger businesses had I just kept them smaller. For example, the enrichment company in the Washington, D.C. area that, we went from D.C., Maryland, Virginia, and then we were in Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. We were headed to California. That's the pandemic. We were headed to Seattle, then California, then Florida, then Georgia. Well, looking back, if we hadn't left the D.C. area and just decided to really dominate D.C., there would have been a lot of efficiencies. There would have been some decisions that I wouldn't have had to make in terms of giving up equity or bringing on partners. That was part of the breakage, in terms of running these businesses and growing them. So, I wouldn't, like everything else, it certainly wasn't as sexy as it sounds. And I probably would do at least the second business differently in terms of growing it. The tutoring business, that it was 10 years and I was ready to part ways with that one. And that worked out well for everybody in the beginning. Not sure about long-term for them. So my goal now with the business that I'm doing now, the coaching, the advising, is really just to kind of keep the team small, keep the business goals small, and really be a master of one, which is lead generation.
Very, very cool. And I want to definitely talk about what you're doing now, because I think it's so important. But just briefly, one of the things that I also want to talk about, like, in your second business, and probably in the first and third as well, is how do you go about, as you kind of alluded to earlier, managing the many different stakeholders and the ups and downs that come accordingly? Because I think in education, your stakeholders is every school is different. You could go down to every student, every individual you interact with is different in a sense. And at many times, you have to be able to not customize what you're saying, but you have to be able to go with their flow. You've got to be able to hear them out, address all of their issues. And at least from my experience, each school has their own set of students which have their own talents, their own struggles, their things that are the same across the board, but also unique at times. So how do you make sure that, as you're going through or expanding the work that you're doing, that you're able to communicate these and kind of spread to the right schools, the right students, and make sure the services, the enrichment program specifically that you're providing, is as impactful as it can be?
Business, and let's be clear, like enrichment versus aftercare. Enrichment is that 1 hour after school, whereas aftercare is kind of the 3 hours. So in the enrichment business, we had multiple stakeholders, and out of the gate, I was ready to serve all of them. We're talking about the kids, the parents, the principals, the providers, okay, the people who provided the karate or the yoga or whatever it was. And then my main client at the end of the day, after all of those four, was the PTAs. And they are an amazing group of people, generally moms, to be honest, although I'm on my kids' PTA, to work with. Ass kickers, and PTAs are a way to build a business. They're also a way to, kind of break your soul. but they really do. In a lot of places that I was in, control the school. They last longer than principals. They certainly last longer than superintendents. So, I think you have to be cognizant of all of your stakeholders, parents, in my case, parents, principals, providers, but you have to really kind of be beholden to one. In our case, it was the PTA. So really what the PTAs wanted is what we had to do as kind of their part. And so just identifying, and this is an exercise we do with startups or even companies that are way down the path, which is, who is your ideal client? And figuring out who your ideal client is. That's pretty powerful to get it down to one, because then you can specialize in that. And then you can, when you've begun to specialize in that, that then helps you in your pitch to make it very succinct, to make your LinkedIn banner look powerful, to make that headline of you look very powerful. What's the transformation that you offer? And we'll work weeks with people on their LinkedIn headline, because once you get it, it's like driving down a highway, at 100 miles per hour. Your LinkedIn, think of it as your banner, or your billboard. I'm sorry, and people are driving, and when you see a really good billboard, even if you're going 100 miles per hour, you see it, you process it, and you think about it. Well, that's what your headline is. It's a transformation that you are going to offer to your potential client. And so you can have multiple stakeholders, but you better just have one client that you serve and do a damn good job for them.
No, that's a really good way, as you said, and to quote you again, master of one, not master of everything, in a sense. You pick the stakeholder and you go all out for that. Okay, very, very nice.
Yeah, and then also be clear about what. I'm not saying becoming a master of one or finding your ideal client is just going to be like, this is easy. When I started the enrichment company, I thought, I will just go to all of these after-school programs that don't have enrichment, because I'm just going to walk in there, and I'm going to have my standard operating procedures, and we've got our registration system, and we've got our providers, and no worries. These people need us. They want us. Well, actually, they didn't know they needed us, and they really didn't want us. And there was no culture of after-school enrichment. So there was no, people paying for your business. So I had to pivot and do the total opposite. And I had to go find PTAs and school systems that had very strong enrichment programs. And what that meant was going in there and saying, I can improve this. I knew it was already good, but I could improve it, and that takes some balls, to say, but it was true. And then I also knew they had really two questions on their mind, they mainly being the PTAs. What are you going to do to our current providers? Because we built an unbelievable community of providers, and how much is this going to cost us? And what I would do, and I encourage other CEOs to do this, if you know that there is one or two or three elephants in the room, call them out immediately. Just come out with it, and sit down, because otherwise they're not really listening, because they're just waiting for you to pause so that they can ask that question. So just say, I'm gonna answer all of your questions at the end, and I've got a presentation. But before I get into it, I think you probably have two main questions that I'd like to answer out of the gate, and then we'll get on with the presentation, then we'll get on with the Q&A. And I can remember doing this countless times, who knows, hundreds, thousands of times in front of PTAs in conference rooms or coffee shops or whatever. And so, one piece of advice would be just get the elephants, and generally there's more than one, out of the room and before you start telling your story.
Okay. And that is sometimes a bit of a switch in thought, because I think we always think my presentation will convince them by the end that this is superior. But as you said, they can't even listen to it if their mind is still focused on the elephant running around. All right, very, very good point. And I think that pivots nicely into one other part that I want to talk about, which is what you're doing now in terms of, and linking that back to lead generation. I know of lead generation. I know of the education space. I very seldom see these two things come into contact in in the same context, in a sense, because oftentimes I feel like in the education space, as you said, it can be hard. Either people don't know that, that they need your service, or it can be, oh, if they know, they probably already have a community that surrounds it. So how do you find the leads that would be the most receptive to your offering, to things that you're doing, and how do you make the connection from then on? So why did you choose to essentially go into this subsegment of the whole industry and the whole concept? And how do you think that you're able to provide value for today, the people that you're coaching, that the people you're working with, for them to be able to successfully find their clients, their potential stakeholders?
I wish I could tell you that, it's kind of like with the, the enrichment company, that I knew that I was going to have to work with large PTAs. And I wish I could tell you that lead generation was going to be it. Actually, I came out of the gate really, truly, from the bottom of my heart, trying to sell relationship building in the education space. And I can tell you from personal experience, that does not sell. So that is not what people are interested in the education space. What they're interested in, what they want, is lead generation. Now, what they need is a very different thing. So you may want leads, but what you first probably need to do is find your ideal client. What you first probably need to do is establish yourself as a thought leader consistently on LinkedIn. And for God's sakes, at least put up a better banner than nothing on your LinkedIn. And what you also need to be able to do, and this is, I've gotten this from wonderful mentors and coaches of my own, is you need to have, before you start doing any lead generation, a signature solution. Okay. And a signature solution is a real kind of hardcore coaching term. Okay. But at the end of the day, what a signature solution means is you have to understand and be able to communicate clearly your transformation for your client. So an exercise that we do with our clients, and this can take weeks, is what is the 9-step transformation that you take your buyer, that principal, that superintendent, that parent, that IT person at the school on, to get them to where they need to be to buy. And you hear those fireworks?
Yeah, there was such a good answer. They released fireworks.
That was it. Yes. Now everybody gets it. No. This could go on for a little while. I'm in a small town in Mexico, and they're celebrating a holiday today. So it wasn't the profoundness of my answer. But the where you have to go from there, once you have those key elements, and I do kind of teach a course on this called the Ed Sales Elevation Experience. So I am plugging that for sure. But once you do get that real clear understanding, then you can go into lead generation. I believe lead generation should be done via email, shows like this, or really tapping into a social media network and being good at it, whether it's Twitter or LinkedIn, one of those two. And it all starts with a really good list, and it takes time. I don't buy lists. We build them from the ground up. And I don't feel bad about emailing those people that we email, because we are really, truly trying to deliver something to them as they open up that email. So I wouldn't suggest that anybody, you want to do this, you want to send 5 or 10 emails yourself, go for it. If you want to do it at the level that we do it at, don't try this at home. We're sending a couple thousand emails a week on behalf of our clients. And again, we get these open rates. So we've got a good list. We've got great writers. And then we are tracking the open rates and the deliverability and the reply rates. So I believe, especially in email, because you can test things. And, as entrepreneurs, we should be testing all the time. Subject lines, what you're offering to them, the length, things like that. Don't mess around with words like free. Don't stick URLs in. Don't test that, because you will not, be successful. But test things like a subject line or what you might be able to offer to somebody as you get them to read the email.
Okay. That was a really, really, really good answer. I have taken. I'm just taking some mental notes. I'll rewatch this episode and do my my step process, and my make sure that my processes are in place from when I'm sending out my next batch of cold emails. So thank you.
Cool.
But as we wind this interview down, I just wanted to end on this particular question. You meet a lot of people in the education space, in a sense. What do you think is the biggest miscommunication between entrepreneurs and kind of the stakeholders, the teachers and the students and the PTAs?
People don't listen. They don't listen. Like, I read an email from a potential client of ours, and I think, in the beginning he's saying no, that he doesn't need it. And I'm cool with that. That's fine, but I was like, hey, let me take a look at whatever you're writing, just like, the offer I made. And I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is no good. And there was no listening there. It's just like, this is who we are. This is who we are. This is who we are. You should buy from us. No, it should be like, this is who you are. This is, what I think the pains are, because I've talked to other people in your network, other principals, other PTA presidents, other superintendents, other teachers. And I'd love to get your thoughts on it. That's 3 sentences. Maybe an email should be 5, but that's it. Here's who I am. Here's what I've learned. I'd like to get your thoughts on it. Do you have 15 minutes? I want to listen. That's it. And that's again, back to this word. That's an honest way of starting a conversation with a principal or a superintendent, listening to them and just learning, not selling. Even if they want you to sell, nope, not in that call. And they still may say, I'm not interested in what you're putting out there, whether it's your social emotional learning platform or your math app, but continue to give them information. Continue to give. And then that principal may leave and go to another school.
Yeah.
And you have kept that relationship. And when you get that, and they're coming around a lot, when you get that reply, hey, it's been a great 15 years at Springbrook Elementary. I've moved on to, Twinbrook. Follow them over there. And that principal may become a superintendent. And all that giving that you did for that many years will finally come to fruition, because it's one email that had 5 sentences. And now you've got a superintendent who believes in you, because you weren't just trying to sell however many years ago. So if there's one thing I could say to do, pretty much the same thing I talked to my 8-year-old about, just listen to people. Pretty simple concept.
Well, if more 8-year-olds got wisdom early, then I'm sure we'd have better entrepreneurs in the space. But very, very, very nice note to end on, and something that I think we can all listen to, at the very least, reflect on, and see how we can implement in whatever it is we're working on. And it's personally something that and you just outlined that so well. I was like, I'm gonna burn every email I have written right now and restructure that in a way that comes across that I do want to listen, and because I genuinely do, and communicate what we feel in writing, in text, in when putting the question out there.
Yeah, I can tell from who you are, and clearly the heart that you have and the desire to help people, that you want to learn and listen. But you are like everybody else and like me, and that desire to sell takes over, and you start pushing the product, and what it does? The opposite. It doesn't sell, and it don't look. So resist that urge, and the time will come, and people on the other end of that email, or the show, the conversation, I didn't I did push my, my course, fine. But other than that, like, I'm here to give, and hope that at some point people who want to work together will come and find me, and they're, whether it's looking at an email or whatever, however it can help. If I can help, I'm game.
Amazing. And with that, I think our show today has come to an end. Thank you so much for being on our episode. It was, I feel, a really, really awesome blend between your experiences, really good practical advice, and things that we can take away to, reflect on and really internalize. So I think in terms of content of our episodes goes, this is a high ranking one, and I really appreciate you taking the time
Thanks.
for having this conversation and being so thoughtful in actually putting your answers out there. So really, really do appreciate it.
It's been a bumpy ride, so if somebody can learn from it, and avoid some of those bumps in the road, I'm glad. And I've been lucky enough to have a lot of people around me who've helped me out. So if I can help somebody, I hope I did.
Thank you. And to our audience, I think I will just echo the sentiment that it was amazing having you guys here today. And as always, we appreciate each and every single one of you who tuned in. And if you have any other thoughts, questions, things that you want to learn more about, please do reach out in the show chat. You can email us, and we'll see how we can get you guys connected to the right resources, the right experiences, and the things that you need to succeed as well. And with that, today's episode of Changing Reality has come to a close. And as always, I'll see you again next Thursday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Thank you.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.